Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God the Father, from our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. Sermon text for today is our gospel reading, including these words. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with little, I will make you, you have been faithful over little, I will set you over much. Enter the joy of your master. So I should have mentioned at the beginning that not only are we starting our new sermon series today, but today is also youth-led worship, and so we're thankful for all of our youth who are helping volunteer in the various areas. Great children's message, by the way, Maya, as well. And so today we're talking, as I said, a new series called Faith Enough to Give, and it's kind of interesting. The longer that I've been a pastor, the more this has kind of changed. When I was first a young pastor, and it was that time of year when you talked about stewardship and giving, I was always dreading it, and I liked talking about it just as little as people liked hearing about it, I think. But as more time has gone by, I actually appreciate the opportunity to talk about it for a couple of different reasons. Because one, it's actually one of the areas that I've seen God work the most in people's lives, at least in the churches that I have been, right? Helping them to manage their money in a God-pleasing way, and just the way that kind of is a tremendous blessing in their life. Now, on the other hand, if you're a guest with us today, you just came in, you're like, seriously, this is the day we showed up to try out? It is, but hopefully by the end of it, you still will find it to be meaningful as well. So we are talking about this concept, this idea of faith enough to give. I was thinking about this in preparation. One of the things that Julie notices is that whenever I am doing premarital counseling, she can always tell what I'm doing. I go to all these meetings and things, and she doesn't know where I am, but she always knows what I'm doing because I become a better husband. Because I'm thinking about these things as I'm talking through it with couples, I end up just accidentally being more emulating the things that I talk about. And so it's interesting, Julie and I are in a time in our life when we're trying to be very frugal. We got a daughter in college and another one about to go, so we've been really, last few years, aligning our life. So in many ways, what you're getting is a sermon that I had to deliver to myself. So hopefully that make you feel better when you hear about it. So what we're talking about today, and for the next few weeks, is the idea and concept of the faith enough to give. And what we're looking at is really, if you look historically at the scriptures, God time and time again says to his people that this is a way that they show their trust in him. That their giving is a way that shows how they trust in him. In fact, lots of times he says things like, he challenges them, and he's like, test me and see if you're faithful to me, if I am not faithful to you. So that's something that we're trying here this month as well. In fact, if you saw my letter that I sent out to everybody, letting you know about this, you saw that, it was kind of a long letter. Who thought it was kind of a long letter? Who didn't even read it because it was so long? Just to let you know, the first proof editor cut it by a third, and the second one cut it by half. So that's how long it was to start with. And that's because, really, I could give my own sermon introducing the sermon series, but I won't do that. I'm just going to kind of give you a picture of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about three different concepts that come from the Bible. One of those is that God asks us to give first, God asks us to give generously, and God asks us to give joyfully. And the challenge that's going along with this sermon series is we're asking everyone, if you've never been able to give at what we call a tithe, at 10%, we're asking everyone to embrace the challenge of trying it for just 1 month. We're not saying do it for the whole year. We're just kind of putting our toe in the water, just baby stepping in, saying for 1 month, what would it look like if we all gave at that level? Now, if you already give at that level, maybe try even giving at a higher level. But it's a way for us to kind of see what would God do with us if we gave in the way that is described in scriptures. To set the tone, I want to start off this way. I want to ask you to think about something. Just to stop and think about, what do you do with your extra money? What do you do with your extra money? Now, probably a lot of you are sitting out there saying, I don't have extra money. What do you mean? There's no extra money. I got money to pay for this and that and the other things. And I would say, well, yeah, you might be right. And unfortunately, what that does is it shows and reveals kind of the way that we are in the American culture. If you're not aware of this, most Americans live where their spending equals and sometimes exceeds their income, right? And the strange thing that you see, and did anybody win the Powerball last night? I didn't even see. Did someone win? No? Okay. So, but you've seen these examples, right? It doesn't matter, like people who live at poverty level spend that amount of money. But if they win the lottery, guess how much they now spend? All of that money, right? So we live in this culture that says we spend all that we have. So I'm going to suggest to you that all of us, myself included, have extra money. And this is how we know this. Have you ever gone on a vacation? That probably means you have extra money. Have you ever done this? Just think about how crazy other cultures would think about this. Have you ever taken a perfectly good and working cell phone, walked into a store, gave a perfectly good working in-order cell phone to them, and walked out with a new perfectly good one that was more money now? Have you ever driven a perfectly good in-order car to a dealership and exchanged it for a more expensive but also currently in good order car? Right? We've all done these things. It's just an example to show that in our culture, in our concepts, we think of these things as necessities, right? But it does mean that we do have, right, extra money. And so, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the words of Jesus, and one of the challenges and things that he reminded us of was this. He said, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Right? And so the concept that Jesus is trying to begin with his disciples to embrace is to understand it's not about the things that we have in this world, right? And he even uses this word greed, right? And I think lots of us would go, well, I'm not greedy, right? In fact, a lot of times we'd say what we are is actually frugal, right? We're saving our money. We're not greedy people. The thing is that greed is always something that's easy to see in someone else, but not so easy to see in ourselves, right? Like, for example, let's say, I don't know, there was somebody you know who was like, all he ever did was talk about how much he wanted a boat, right? That's probably greedy, right? Don't you think? Raise your hand if you, yeah, I'm keeping track of who raised their hand. But I want you to think of it this. I want to change how we think about this word. So I want you to think about the word greed as defined this way: the assumption that it is all for my consumption. Greed would be the assumption that everything that we have is for our consumption, right? And again, by the way we live, particularly in American society, that's how most of us act, right? Everything that we've received from God we think is for us. And the challenge I think that we have to recognize is that most of us are going to run out of time before we run out of stuff. You realize that? I mean, if we timed it perfectly, wouldn't it be like on our deathbed we paid our last bill and we're out of money, right? Wouldn't that be the perfect way for things to go? But it never does. Instead, we have all this stuff, and don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying leaving things to family and things are bad things, but I've been with plenty of people who've walked. Have you ever been someone's the agent for the estate where you had to get rid of all their stuff? Is that crazy or what, right? Think of how many things people just hold on to forever because they're so important to them, and the second they're gone, what do their loved ones do with them? Put them in the trash. Right? I went back and looked. So in 25 years, I've done 137 funerals. And no, I can tell you this for sure. No one's going to stand up at your funeral and say, she had really expensive couch and great shoes. No one's ever done that. People don't talk about that, right? So the challenge we have is that the more that we are blessed, the less that we can sometimes see it and perceive it, right? And so I'm going to suggest to you that one of the things that Jesus is trying to convey to us in all of the things that he says about money, as I mentioned in the letter I sent out, Jesus teaches on money on money than on any other subject in the New Testament. And I'm going to suggest to you that this is one of the things he wants us to understand, that money is not the meaning of life. It is the tool for doing something meaningful. Money in itself is not evil, right? It's the love of money. Money, in fact, is a tremendous blessing, but it doesn't give meaning to our life. But the things that God gives us, including our money, we can do really meaningful things. So it leads us to thinking about the Old Testament lesson. I'm going to suggest to you that time and time and time again throughout the Old Testament and then even into the New, the reason that God has us give first is a spiritual discipline to remind us of where it comes from, right? We've heard this in the Old Testament. When you come into the land that your Lord, your God, is giving you for an inheritance and take possession of it and live in it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from your land, that the Lord your God has given you. You shall put it in a basket, and you shall go to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there, right? So what he says to them is when we finally get into the promised land, and you get this land that's flowing with milk and honey that everybody wants to have, but you're going to have, as a reminder of how you got it, you're going to give the first of it to me, right? I was thinking about this. This happened to line up with a lesson I've been doing in 8th grade confirmation, and I was talking to them about trying to understand the ways that we show our thankfulness to God, right? That we're grateful for the things he's given us. And I was using the illustration with parents, right? So I said, let's say when you turn 16 that your parents get you a car, right? How do you show that you are grateful, for the car? And they're all like, say thank you. And I'm like, I think you could do better. I think there's other things you could do. And they finally started picking up, like, run errands, drive my siblings around, right? That sort of thing. But imagine if at 6, that you were in their shoes at 16, your parents asked you to do something and you said, no, it's my car. Right? How would we respond to that? Because it is true, we gave them the car, but now they turn around and say, it's my car. Well, newsflash, every single thing that you own, God gave you. And so when we resist giving back to him, we're acting the same way. And so that's where the first fruit idea came. So that everything that we receive, when we give the first of it back to God, it's a reminder of where it came from. In fact, we see this in the parable that we heard for today. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them with his property. Here's the interesting thing. A lot of times when we get into this parable, if you've heard it before, people get caught up on why does the one person have 5 and the other gets 3 and this guy gets 1 and why is that one guy so dumb and the master seems kind of mean, right? But keep in mind, as always, with all parables, we did this last summer or 2 summers ago. With parables, there's always a person who's supposed to be God, and then there's always people that are supposed to be us, right? And so in this parable, it's the master who's God, right? And so we kind of rush by this first point a lot of times when we try to get to the parable of talents, and we forget this one. That the thing that all of it is built on is everyone is operating with his money, not their money. In fact, it's from this parable that we get the concept of the idea of being a steward, right? What's a steward? Someone who operates and takes care of someone else's stuff, particularly their money. And so as the parable goes, the master returns after a long time, and the guy who was given 5 has doubled it, the guy who's given 3 has doubled it, but the guy who's given 1 has done nothing with it. And like I said, a lot of times we can get bogged down on, why do some people get 5, some get 3, some get 1, and the parable doesn't answer it. But I am going to just kind of share this with you, just so you know. Spoiler alert: all of you are 5-talent people. All of you are 5-talent people. You know how I know that? Because this parable applies to everybody in the world. And do you know where you rank in terms of rich in the world? Nobody knows? You are among the top 5% richest people in the world, right? So we can all say we're 5-talent people. God has blessed us tremendously, right? And so as they go through their stewardship, as they go through taking care of what they're supposed to, they get their report card. Now just imagine that if you went to your financial person who managed your money, you said, hey, how are things going? And they're like, I'm not really sure. How many of you would keep them as a financial manager? No, right? So if we were to step back and even ask ourselves, how are we doing at managing God's stuff? And we answered, well, I don't really know. I think we would fire ourselves, wouldn't we? Right? So the point that God is trying to make, or Jesus is making with this parable, right, is leading us to this understanding that it all comes from him. And so when we steward it for him, we're accomplishing what he wants. And that's why he says this: well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. And I don't know why I should use the end of that verse where he says, enter into the joy of your master. Have you ever thought about what that meant? Enter into the joy of your master. I think most of us think it means going to heaven. And maybe it does. But I'd suggest to you that he says, you have demonstrated that you're faithful with the small I've given you stewardship over. You're now part of me, family, the company, right? Enter into the joy of your master. You've been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. And so what God is trying to lead us to do and to understand is this, is that he has given us everything. All of it comes from him. In our reading from Thessalonians, we heard Paul talk about, he uses this first concept, but he applies it to salvation. Did you notice that? He says that the believers, those early believers, were the first fruits of God's salvation. They were the first ones that his death, his resurrection, and his ascension had been applied to. And I don't know if you ever thought about it. We'll talk about it a little bit next week. The early church, do you know how much the early church gave? What we're told in Acts chapter 2? Anybody know? Everything. 100%. That's how the early church reacted to the idea. Now, to be fair, they thought Jesus was coming back before they died, right? To be fair. But still, that's the way they operated, right? They believed that all of this had been given from God, so all of it was to be put to use from God, right? And so when we think about the thing that God has asked us to do, we think about the challenge to try and give first, right? And so if you've never done Financial Peace University, it's something that we've done for years and years and years here. It's really helpful and to think of a godly way of taking care of your finances. We're going to probably offer another one here at the first of the year. But he has two really simple principles, right? And he didn't come up with this. Dave Ramsey didn't come up with it. Other people have done it. It's really easy. You give first to God, and he says give 10%, and then you save 10%, and then you live on 80%, right? That's the kind of idea that he operates with. But no matter who you talk to, when you talk about Christian giving, the idea is to give first, to understand that it's actually not ours to begin with. And when we do, we discover something kind of amazing, as we'll unpack over the next couple of weeks, which is that giving first allows us to also give generously. When we see that we give first and that God is faithful, it allows us to give generously. And then when we give generously, which we'll see in a little bit, we learn that we also then get to give joyfully. So my prayer and hope for you as we continue through this journey is that we look at this as a way that God challenges us to trust in him. There's so many ways in which we are called to trust in him throughout our lives, right? Times of illness, times of challenge in relationships. Money tends to be a big challenge for many, many people. And I don't know if you know this, it's one of the leading causes of divorce in the United States. So in fact, when I sit down with couples to do premarital counseling with them, we spend a lot of time talking about this as well. The quote I shared from Martin Luther I thought was kind of interesting. Maybe you've heard it before, but he basically says that there's 3 conversions, right? There's the conversion of the head, the heart, and the last one is the pocketbook, right? That's the one that's the most challenging. But the testimony of Scripture is kind of amazing, is that we have a God who is faithful to us in all things. He has given us not all that we own and possess, but his very own Son. And that in that death, that resurrection applied to us, it gives us a joy and a freedom in life. A joy and a freedom that we enjoy with our Master, because we know all things are in his hands. So I hope you'll join me this month as we trust God once again and ask him to give us faith enough to give. Amen.